Hey everyone, today we'll be building one of these Squonk mods. It's a 3D printed enclosure which I finished with this truck bed liner spray. So it's got a nice gritty finish. And the Squonk holes over on this side. The idea was you don't need to, while you're in fire in position, you can use your finger over here to prime the bottle. This one's in a DNA normal 75 cutout, but I have them in a 75C with the bigger screen and the different up-down button layouts. Now by the time you watch this, I'm not sure if these 3D printed enclosures will still be available on the website. In fact, I'm planning on removing them. They're extremely time consuming to make. They take like a day to print, and then the assembly, as you'll see in the next step, I print them in separate pieces. The sanding, the finishing, they're a bit of a pain, but hopefully, again, maybe by the time you're watching this, I will have an alternative aluminum enclosure available that'll be suitable for a Squonk mod like this. So stick around and we're gonna build this thing. So here we are with the enclosure and all its separate pieces. If you watch the last video, the similar 3D printed enclosure I mentioned, I print them all separate to make sure I don't need any supports anywhere. For example, if the main enclosure here were printed in a single piece, if I printed standing up, then when the head, so standing up, let's say, right? When the head gets up top and needs to span this gap here, it would need to fill this with supports. Or if I printed flat, well, same for these parts here. If it's sitting flat on the print bed like this, when we need to span this gap here, this would need to be filled in with support. So, and another reason I print this one in two pieces. My printer isn't the best, and the higher up I go, maybe the more wobble I get in the build plate, and the precision gets progressively worse as I get higher. So I print these in two pieces, flat like this, and I offer the recess in different sizes. So this way, I have different versions of this piece with different size recesses for the 510, but this piece is always the same. Same with these, they print flat, no supports, but it does mean a little bit of work to put it together. So let's get started on that. First thing I'll do is the main enclosure here. What I've been doing is I'll hold it as close to lined up as I can, and I'll throw a piece of tape on the back seam like that. I'll apply some glue here. I also wear the latex gloves. Once I glue up, you'll see, and I hold it together, your fingers are going to be in the path of the glue, so just make sure you don't get any on you. There's a scrap piece of wire to spread that apply pressure and keep an eye on the top and bottom, the ridges there. Line those up. Apply pressure. It'll only take a couple seconds. We'll let this dry a few minutes before we assemble the other parts. In the meantime, the front of the enclosure and the board holder, I glue the board holder down onto it so it becomes part of the enclosure. So first I want to get the screws in here. And if, with whatever kit, or even if you just order the board holder, if you choose the internal mount method, you'll notice that 2 of the 3 screws, I don't know if you can pick that up there, have a side that's a little ground on the head, and that's because the, well, I don't know if it's really needed, but the screw's so close to the opening that the head kind of creeps in there, so the ground side is meant to line up with the curvature of the hole there. Line up the ground side. Would have been easier to do this without the damn gloves. Okay. To line this up, I'll throw in a few actuators. I'll cover this side with glue, making sure to cover the screw heads, because once this is all together, we'll need to remove these nuts here, and we don't want the screw to turn. So I'll paint this side with the CA glue, and then we'll come drop it right on here, and we'll let that cure. Just like that. I normally do the back of the enclosure first. I won't bother with the tape anymore. I'll paint this side with glue, then I'll drop it on, and thanks to the gloves, I'll pinch the top and bottom here to make sure I'm lined up this way. And then you only have a few seconds to do this before the glue starts to grab. I'll come around the sides, make sure I'm level, put some pressure on it. Let's do that. The fact that this is messy and we have glue on the seams and now on the front, no big deal. I'll be sanding this before finishing it with the shrug bed liner, so I'm really not concerned about that. Last piece for the glue up, the front. Okay, at this point, if you have any, I'm not sure if this will pick up on camera here, any spots where you might have, if it's too bad, I mean, reprint, but if you have tiny areas where there might have been a little bit of a layer adhesion problem, I'm going to give those a little coat with the CA glue. Even along the seams. Okay, we'll give this several minutes. The lid you might need, I don't want to put that on the glue right now. It's a little tight on the height there, so you might need with a flat piece of paper to give it some minor adjustment. Another thing I'll do before we sand is I take my small flat file And to just square up the inside ledge here all the way around, and to make sure that we have a perfectly flat and smooth transition between the seam line here. I won't do it now because that glue's still wet, but I work around the inside, both on the bottom and the top here a little bit with the flat file. Your screw holes, I'll do this off camera, but you might need to clean them up with a 1/8 drill bit, because there are 3 millimeter diameter magnets that go in there. And even though I've got the hole at 3.2, I don't know, with the 3D print, I usually need to clean those up with a 1/8 drill bit. Don't go too deep; they're only 2 millimeters tall. So you'll feel the drill bit as soon as you get restriction. You're at the bottom of the hole. Stop, just to clean up the diameter of those. I won't film the sanding, but unlike the last video, I'll show you what it looks like after the sanding before we apply that spray liner. And what you'll expect to see, everything that is a seam should pretty much be gone. If there's unevenness on the sides, that should all disappear with the sanding. Another thing I'll do before sanding is get the magnets in there, because it'll help hold the lid in place while I'm moving this around on the bench sander. If you're short on magnets and you're doing this at home, you might not want to do that, because if we screw up the enclosure during the sanding, then we've lost the magnets that we've put in there. So if you're short on magnets, maybe you want to make sure your sanding and even the spray finishing works out first. The lid would hold. I've done it without the magnets, but I like to put them in first, so we'll do that. I've marked each side of my stack with a little line of Sharpie. I'm going to split that stack in half. And so long as we keep feeding from the unmarked side, take one off, dip it in the glue, put it in. We'll make sure the magnets will be in the right direction on both the lid and the enclosure. I use CA glue for that. A few drops, a piece of tape. Something non-magnetic. Last one as my Sharpie. Give that a couple minutes. I'll do the sanding and I'll be back. Here we are after the sanding. Notice those seams are pretty much invisible. The print lines are now mostly gone too. It doesn't need to be 100% perfect. There's a few imperfections here, but because of the texture on that truck bed liner spray, it'll fix all of this up. So off to the spray. If you do this, there's a link in the, or I can put a link in the video description of the truck bed liner spray that I use. You want to hold the can as far away from it as possible, because then you get a much finer texture on it. If you get too close, you'll get big blobs of it. So light coats far away, and between coats you wait 5-10 minutes, maybe 2-3 light coats, and back in a sec, show you what that looks like. And the finish is done. No seams, no print lines. If you're paying close attention, you'll notice this isn't the same one. This is one I had pre-assembled and finished. It has the regular DNA for the normal screen cutouts. The person I'm building this one for has a regular DNA 75 board. We can start with the assembly. In fact, first thing we'll do is get those little nuts off of those screws. First thing I'll solder to save a wire. I've been using this little ground plane here, and there's a recess in the top, so that's going to go in here. The nut of the 510 is going to be sandwiched against that, and the contact for the negative side of the battery, I'm going to solder right onto that plane. So the negative of the 510, the negative of the battery are automatically connected. Then I'll run a short wire to the ground on the board, which is right up top here, and that'll connect all our common grounds. And that means we don't need to run a wire from the battery negative to the bat negative on the board, which is down here. So we're saving a wire there. So first thing I'll do is I'll tin the whole little ground plane. Just throw a bit of flux on there to get it started. You don't need a whole lot. Probably want to elevate that. fact, maybe a bit more flux won't hurt. Now I'll just dry fit it in here for a sec. Try and get an approximation of where the battery contact's going to go. We'll go about there. I'm going to tin the backside of the contact here. I'm also I'm gonna throw a blob on the corner here. So that's where our ground cable is gonna, ground wire is gonna go. And I want a bit of extra flux to make that easier. I'll snug that down some more later, but so the board, I'm going to pre-wire the out, so the positive 510. I'm using some 16 gauge wire here. Let's get our actuators in there. For the screen, unlike my other brackets where the screen is sandwiched between the outside of the enclosure and the board holder, because this board holder is stuck in there, I couldn't do that. So we'll use some double-sided tape, not to glue the screen in, just to give it the right amount of padding or height that it needs. You'll see in a sec. Let's get the screen in here. So I'm using one piece of the, they're both 3M double-sided tape, the interior and then the exterior. So the exterior side, I peeled the backing off, and we'll put that on the board. The other side we'll leave on. So it'll just, I mean, the board holder will hold it left to right and up to down in the right spot. This will just hold it against, or push it up against the outside of the enclosure. Like so. Get the little nuts on. For the bottom contact, which will be the positive, if you can see inside the enclosure here, there's a channel to route the wire. So I'm going to wire it behind the contact so it can sit flush. And I'm using a piece of 18 here. If you look at the data sheet for the 75, 18 is fine on the battery side of things, not on the output, but on the input, 18 meets the requirements. So I'll just mark my distance. And I'll tin the back of this. And this one just glues in. If you can see inside there, my wire for the positives lining right up against the pad. Where it was. So we'll tack that on there. For the ground, to connect the ground to the board, instead of using a short wire, which is hard to work with at those tiny lengths, I'm going to do what we've been doing with the IPWM boards. I'm going to use a little piece of solder wick. I'll tin it, and then this will be super easy to bend. It's about the width of the pad there. We'll tin that. That's about right. I think I'll first tack the board side. You won't be able to see in there. And then onto the ground plane. I want to be quick on this one because we're right up against the plastic enclosure. That's the board wired. And then, so we only have the positive for the 510 left to do. Let me tighten the nut here. And don't go too insane with the plastic enclosure and crush it. All right. Now these new Mod Maker Squonk connectors, there's a little tab here. So our positive's gonna solder onto that, which means I want it maybe make it loop so I can keep some tension so the wire's against the back there. Small loop and come at it from this side. Even underneath. So let's say about there. Tin that. I'm going to want this perpendicular . That'll work. Everything else then is just gluing the bottle holder, battery sled about halfway. Let's see if she powers on. Positive on the bottom. Looking good. Get a bottle in there. Deck is flooding. Coolio. That's pretty great. So a DNA 75 Squonk in a 3D printed enclosure. Once again, thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.